Hey everybody, how's it going? In this video, we're going to be talking more about functions. Specifically, we're going to be talking about two things, the keyword return and something called the default value. But before that, let's recap really quickly on what we had last time. So we said that we can create a function to encapsulate code that can be reusable at a different point in time. And in order to define the function, we first have to use the syntax. We use the def keyword and then name the function and pass in whatever parameters that we want. And we talked about what parameters are. The parameters are the things that you're going to use in the future in order for you to do something with that function. Okay? Sometimes there are no parameters in a function, but that depends on what you want to do. And the more you practice it as a developer, the better you are at understanding when you want to pass parameters, when you don't want to pass parameters. Okay, and the idea of this function was to add two numbers. And the two numbers, we named them as number 1 and number 2. And whatever the result that we're going to have here is going to be printed out to the screen. So, in order to use that, we copy the function signature, we put it here, and then we pass in whatever values we want to add. So 5 is going to take on the value number 1, and 2 is going to take on the value number 2. And whatever happens is going to be printed out to the screen. So let's have a look at what happens when we run it. Turns out it's 7. Now that you're all caught up, let's move on to the return keyword. Let's say that I don't just want to print things onto the screen. I want to store the result of that function for later use. The good news is we have something for that. It's called the return function. So, the return function works as follows. At the end of the function that you're describing, after whatever logic happens, you write return. And then right next to it is whatever it is, the result of this function. So if the goal was to multiply two numbers by each other and get the result, then the result would be next to the return. If to add two numbers by each other, then the result. If to divide, you get the idea. So I'm going to put here total, right? Now let's define total first. Total is equal to number 1 plus number 2. So you see what's happening here? I am getting this number, storing it in a variable, and then returning it. Okay, so let's see it in action. So I'm just going to write here equal. I'm going to say number to store. This is what I'm going to call the variable. Okay, and I'm going to put the signature here, pass in 5 and 2 again. Okay, and then let's print out this number now, number to store. All of a sudden, when you print out this number to store, it has the value 7 in it. Notice how we commented the print, so it's no longer a factor. And now the print prints out this variable, number to store. This is because the return keyword got the final answer of this function and returned it back here. So the result in this position is 7. You could easily remove this whole entire function and put 7 instead of it, because they're both equivalent. And then it is stored in number to store, and then finally it is printed out to the screen. So that's how the return function works, and that's how functions in general work. Now let's have a look at something called the default value. The default value is basically what happens if I don't pass anything to the function, and the function has parameters. So I have parameter number 1 and parameter number 2. I'm going to say I'm going to pass number 5 and 2, but what happens if I pass only 5? Well, it's going to yield an error. Okay, but I don't want an error to happen. Well, I'm going to say if nothing gets passed on other than number 1, I'm just going to make it equal to a 0. So what's happening here is basically that I could pass on two values, 5 and 2. And it works. But I could also pass on 1 parameters, and it still works. And the reason for that is because 5 is matched up with number 1. But when I pass number 2, it gets matched up with number 2. If I don't match number 2, then the default value that it will take on is the 0. And the same thing can be applied to number 1. So let's make the default value being 10. So if I put 5 and 2, it's going to produce 7. If I put only 5, it's going to produce 5 because 5 plus 0 is 5. If I remove 5, it's going to be 10 plus 0. So the answer is 10. And that is it for functions. That's how functions work in general. You can use them to reuse code that you don't want to repeat and make your code more organized. Use the return value to get the final result of the code. Use the default feature that it has in order to not make your code crash in case the user doesn't want to pass on a certain value. And that's how things work in functions, and they're very, very useful, and you should be able to make them second nature to you because you're going to use it a lot. Thank you very much. See you in the next one.